Welcome to this new mPulse UI deep dive. In this video, we will take a look at timer and metric subtypes and their charting implications, or, to put it more plainly, how to work with timer and metric subtypes when you create or edit a chart in the new mPulse UI. When you create a single series chart, for instance in a bar chart, an area, or a combo chart, showing, let's say, page load, you don't really need to think about what the data is that you're charting. You can just drag any timer or metric onto the Y pad of these charts and the chart will render with no fuss. However, when you create a multi-series chart, you do have to consider what you are actually going to display on that single Y-axis. The reason for this is that the unit that each data's number represents can vary massively. A metric measuring thousands of bytes can't share the same axis as another metric that represents error counts, for instance, which are recorded on a one-to-one basis. In other words, the number 1 on an error count means one error, and the number 1 with a byte measurement like kilobytes represents thousands of bytes. They don't share the same unit, so they can't really share the same axis. This concept is made solid in that the y-axis in these charts displays a range of numerical values and then plots your data onto that range to create a chart. If you have two data that belong to massively different ranges or use a completely different unit, then the resulting chart will be hard to read at best or completely misleading, with its data showing the wrong range at the worst. Let's take a look at how the widget editor keeps you from making these problematic combinations using a system we call introspection. So firstly, let's take a look at a chart with a single series. What you can see here is that we've got a line chart. It's charting errors per page. This is a metric. It's a count. So the Y pad icon here shows us that only count metrics can now be dropped onto this pad. Also, if we look in the sidebar, here you can see that only counts are currently enabled as I'm scrolling down. If I go to the metric list here, you can see more clearly that all of the counts are enabled. Then when we go to the size in bytes, they're not enabled. And the same thing for percentages. And what this means is the introspection engine is trying to stop you dragging anything other than count metrics onto the pad here. If I look in the timers list, you can see that every single timer is disabled for the same reason. And that's because you can't mix your timers and your metrics at all. They don't make any sense on the same y-axis. Now let's take a look at the timer and metric subtypes. First, we'll take a look at timers. Timers can be recorded in seconds or milliseconds. So to see this in action, let's make another line chart. I'll go to Dashboards, Widgets, New, and then Line Chart. I'll drag time on here. What we want to do now is to drag DOM ready. And I'll just let that render. And what you can see when the chart renders is that this chart is charting a timer which is recorded in seconds. You can see the S here, and you can see the S here in the title, and that indicates that this axis is in seconds. Now we'll drag in a second timer. So in this case, I'm going to drag in DNS resolution. So let's get DNS resolution, and we'll delete DOM ready. And you can see that when the chart re-renders, DNS resolution is displayed, and this particular timer is a millisecond value, and that's now reflected in the axis here and represented in the label. Now next, what we're going to do is we're going to combine these two timers and see what happens. So I'm going to get DOM ready, drop it back onto the y-axis, and you can see that now the chart is re-rendered, we can see a few different things here. Number one, we can see that the axis now has a label which shows a shared scale, which in this case is a duration. We can also see that it's a duration which has a scale in seconds, as you can see on the values here as well. And the third thing that you can see is that the DNS resolution, because it's in milliseconds, it gets scaled down because 1 second is 1,000 milliseconds, so it's a much larger value. You can see as a result of this becomes a very small value at the bottom of the chart, scraping along the bottom. Now in this case, it's not too bad, but in some charts you may find that this basically becomes a flat line. So that's something to bear in mind. So next, we'll take a look at doing the same thing with a metric. So I'm just going to delete these two timers. We'll keep time. And we go to the metric tab. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up CSS decoded body size. We'll wait for that to render. And again, you can see that this is recorded in megabytes. Now we're going to delete CSS decoded body size. And we're going to bring in JS transfer size. This value is recorded in kilobytes, and you can see it goes up to 80 kilobytes, which is just under 1/10 of a megabyte. So again, when I combine these two together, if I bring in CSS decoded body size again, and this should be the bigger of the two values, you can see that JS transfer size is much smaller. Now in this case, because the megabyte size isn't very big, it's actually coinciding with the kilobyte size, and you're getting a chart which actually is quite useful, really. The two values actually intersect with each other. So as a rule, when you combine two timers or two metrics, which are sizes, our UI will take the largest unit in that set of timers or metrics, and it will use that for the axis. And if there are any timers or metrics which are in a smaller unit, for instance, if they're in kilobytes or if they're in milliseconds, then it will scale those appropriately for that larger axis and then display all the values together. So unlike different types of metrics and combining timers and metrics, you can actually mix together milliseconds and seconds values. And you can obviously with size values mix those two together and the charts will render. You've just got to be careful that the chart that it produces is something that's useful for you and your team.